but China is the Rosetta Stone. If you can understand China, stupidly forgetting that no one is ever going to understand China. And so I set out to understand China, read a bunch of books on China stuff, and I don't understand anything. What you will notice is that this year, which is a turbulent year, besides that one video, there's nothing. It's crickets. The big story was China shut down due to COVID, zero tolerance of COVID. And you go, okay, well, first of all, you should right away say, well, weren't they the first to open up? Do you really, does that make sense? The second thing you should say is, do you really think China cares about saving some of its citizens? And I'm not trying to be xenophobic. It's just China's got what, 1.4 billion or something. And you know, they've got concentration camps with so many guys who are going to die. And so then on top of that, you find out that they went zero tolerance and locked down 370 million people. And what got announced is that 4 people had died from COVID. You go, China shut down 370 million for 4 people? You have got to have had a better story than that, right? So simple model is that China intentionally shut down its industrial base and the supply chain again to wreak havoc on somebody for some reason, possibly having to do with, you know, we're already tried to talk to a trucker this morning from Airgas. I asked them if they couldn't get neon, which comes from Russia. It turns out critical to supply chip production. He said, oh yeah, that's really hard. But he says, nothing, we're having trouble sourcing everything. So he said that basically the system's still very broken. And the truckers know, they do know. And so if Xi Jinping sees the ability to inflict real pain at the right moment, right? All of a sudden his opponent is down, we'll go zero tolerance COVID, and we will really squash him like a bug. Now, there is a counter argument. And the counter argument is that it's much deeper than that. Oh, shock of shocks. A guy named Peter Zeihan, who's a demographer formerly of Stratfor, which is a private intelligence agency, which means you just get paid more to do the same job. He says the world, a lot of people don't know this, the world's population is collapsing. They think the world population is exploding. It's collapsing. I heard the other day Elon Musk, when asked what's the most important problem humanity faces right now, he said the collapse of the world population. And then they laughed. He said, no, I'm not kidding. The collapse of the world population. So he gets it right. That we're not even close to doing a replacement. Now, my wife would cheer, I would cheer, but Zeihan's model is that it's going to collapse globalization. It's going to tear the fabric and make globalization. And it's not like globalization is looking healthy, right? We've got a war. We've got potential, you know, shipping problems. Globalization is looking very green around the gills. So if globalization collapses, the first thing you bet on is going to be very inflationary, because now the most efficient supplier will not necessarily be supplying. It will shut down, you know, 8,000-mile supply chains that had been feeding us a lot of goods and services. So this is a very scary situation. And with the world population just getting older, none of this is a good sign. On top of that, it looks like Russia may not supply us with resources for rock bottom prices like they did for the last 40 years. China will not be necessarily supplying dirt cheap labor like they did for the last 40 years. The boomers are now exiting the workforce, not entering like they did 40 years ago. The interest rates are they're not going from 16 to nothing like they did 40 years ago. They're now going to go from nothing to something. And the workforce, no one wants to go back to work. There's a very broken system here, and it doesn't look short-term to me. This is not some passing thing. The Russians are not going, we're not going to see the emergence of this resource dynasty, this emergence of this labor dynasty. That's over. And some pundits say that the age of monetary policy is over, which is a fascinating way of putting it. And that is basically saying the central banks are out of ammo. And the V bounces, you know, all those V bounces, the markets get fluttery, and then all of a sudden, boom, it goes back up. And the investors for 40 years have been taught, just hang on, just hang on. You'll always get saved, just hang on. I think the 40 years of V bounces are those 40 wonderful years in which tailwinds carried the ship. And if those tailwinds, of which I listed at least 4, are over, those V bounces are over. And I've got an argument. I was on a Twitter space with a guy named George Noble, for example, who's Peter Lynch's, famous Peter Lynch's understudy. I said, George, I think the markets are going to be uninvestable. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, imagine the Nikkei's a model. The Nikkei peaked in 89 and it's still underwater. It's been 3 decades and it's still underwater. I said, I think the markets are going to look like that. If you were a US investor in 67 to 81, there was nothing you could do in the equity markets that would make you money. You know, you say, oh, you can pick this very carefully. And no, you can't, right? You did no one's that good a sharpshooter. And if they are, it's not going to help me. And so I think we're looking at we may be looking at the grinding down of 4 decades of excess.